Rome was no longer the same. The divided Senate trembled under the weight of an internal conflict that threatened to devour the very soul of the Republic. On one side, Julius Caesar, a glorious general and audacious strategist, beloved by the legions and feared by the aristocrats. On the other, the Optimates, the conservative elite led by Pompey and his political heirs, who wanted to restore the old senatorial order and prevent Caesar from transforming Rome into a personal regime of absolute power. This bloody clash, known as the Roman Civil War, plunged the empire into chaos and pitted brother against brother, soldiers against former comrades in arms. After Caesar's victory over Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus, it seemed that the game was won. Pompey had fled to Egypt, where he would be assassinated. However, the embers of resistance continued to burn in North Africa, where the last and fiercest defenders of the senatorial cause were concentrated. There, a powerful alliance was forming. General Metellus Scipio, one of the most influential men in the Senate, joined forces with two names that evoked strength and brutality: Titus Labienus, Caesar's former lieutenant who was now his enemy, and the feared King Juba I of Numidia, master of an elite army made up of light cavalry, war elephants, and African soldiers accustomed to the desert and guerrilla warfare. These men, together, represented a real danger. They had more soldiers, more supplies, and control of strategic positions such as Adrumate, Yazida, and Thapsus. Africa had become the last stronghold of Caesar's enemies, and he knew that to end the civil war once and for all, he needed to win there. He had to win not only with weapons, but with tactical precision, emotional control, and courage in the face of the impossible. This is where it all begins. The Battle of Thapsus is not just a territorial dispute. It is the last breath of a divided empire, the struggle between a new world and the ruins of an order that would not accept falling without resistance. In late December 47 BC, Caesar set out from Sicily with his sights set on Africa. But fate, as always, took its toll. During the sea crossing, a violent storm scattered his fleet, and when he landed near the city of Adrumate on the African coast, he had only 3,000 infantry and 150 cavalry, a vastly reduced force compared to what awaited him. The terrain was hostile. The coastal cities were well fortified and dominated by the Pompeians. And Adrumate, the first attempt at conquest, was defended by Gaius Canidius and Calpurnius Piso, two commanders who were unwilling to negotiate with Caesar. He tried to pave the way through diplomacy, but was ignored. Still, without adequate supplies, without a full army, and with the coast guarded by enemy ships, Caesar launched small raids to probe the city's defenses. He quickly realized that, with so few men, there was no way he could win by brute force at that moment. Worse still, groups of Numidian cavalry were approaching quickly, sent by King Juba I. These African horsemen, renowned for their agility and ambush tactics, were tasked with surrounding, wearing down, and if possible, eliminating Caesar before he could establish himself. It was in this scenario of pressure and scarcity that Caesar began to demonstrate why he was feared and respected. He did not freeze in the face of danger. With an almost cold calm, he kept his troops constantly moving, avoiding encirclement, preventing ambushes, and buying time until the rest of his legions could reach the coast. He used what he had at his disposal, a small cavalry to keep the Numidians at bay, and his knowledge of the terrain and logistics to march with precision to a safer point, Ruspina. There, with his men exhausted and not yet knowing whether reinforcements would arrive, Caesar did not think of giving up. He thought of how to win. The landing at a disadvantage, the initial failure at Adrumate, and the arrival of the Numidians were only the first tests. The real showdown was yet to come, and Caesar knew that to win, he needed more than strength. He needed strategy, patience, and complete control over every step of the game. The city of Ruspina became Caesar's lifeline. There, for the first time since he set foot in Africa, he found a small respite. It was a strategic point. It allowed him to observe the enemy's movements, secure some local supplies, and most importantly, organize the surviving troops who arrived exhausted from the journey and the first skirmishes. But time was short. Caesar knew that every day of inactivity was one more day for his enemies to strengthen themselves. He needed to act quickly, but without recklessness. On January 4th, with only half of his army still assembled, Caesar decided to leave Ruspina with about 9,000 legionaries, divided into 30 cohorts, on a foraging expedition, basically, to search for food and supplies to keep the troops alive. It was a common action, but in that context it involved extreme risk. He knew this, and so he kept his troops in compact formation, alert and disciplined, even on a scavenging mission. It wasn't long before Caesar's scouts brought bad news. The Optimates forces were approaching. They were led by two dangerous names, Titus Labienus, Caesar's former ally, now a traitor thirsting for revenge, and Marcus Petrio, another experienced and ruthless general. Together, they brought Numidian cavalry, heavy infantry and archers, a complete and coordinated force. Their intention was clear, to crush Caesar before he had time to gather the rest of his army. The battle began with the enemy clearly in the advantage. The Numidian cavalry surrounded with speed and precision, while the archers and infantry pressed on the flanks. Caesar found himself on the verge of collapse. It was a critical moment. The Roman soldiers were surrounded, outnumbered, and faced veterans who knew their tactics. For a moment, all seemed lost. But Caesar, even in the chaos, did not lose control. He reorganized the front line, prevented the cohorts from breaking up, and kept his soldiers in a defensive position, using shield formations such as the testudo to resist enemy projectiles. It was not a victory, but it was a salvation. With coolness and direct leadership, Caesar fought side by side with his men. He managed to lead a strategic retreat to Ruspina, saving what was left of his force and proving, once again, that his greatest weapon was not the sword, it was intelligence under pressure. That battle would not be forgotten. Caesar returned to Ruspina without supplies, but with valuable lessons and the confidence of his troops. Now, he knew exactly who he was dealing with. The war would not be won with a single move, but with each calculated step. And the next step was already underway. Back in Ruspina, Caesar understood that the conflict in Africa was not a quick campaign, but a deadly chess game, where every move required precision and long-range vision. After the confrontation with Labienus and Petrio, it became clear that his adversaries were well-armed, motivated, and had the logistical support of King Jubai. Caesar's only chance was to gather more men, reorganize his strategy, and choose the battlefield wisely. And that's what he did. He began by reinforcing the defenses of the camp at Ruspina, using his own legionaries to build more robust fortifications. During this time, his legions began to arrive little by little. They came from Sicily, from other provinces, and even from allies who were just waiting for the right moment to join him. The arrival of the 13th and 14th legions, composed of veterans hardened by the Gallic Wars, was a turning point. With them came not only military power, but also morale. The soldiers knew that they now had a real chance of facing the Optimates on equal terms. At the same time, Caesar began to react more offensively. He captured supplies on the Chinas Islands, attacked enemy cavalry groups, and tested the defenses near Yazida, a city that provided essential water for Scipio and Juba's troops. With each action, he pushed his opponents into a more uncomfortable position, forcing them to react under pressure. Metellus Scipio, with some 13 legions and Numidian support, remained cautious. Even with the numerical advantage, he preferred to remain on the defensive, observing Caesar's movements, perhaps hoping that luck or time would favor him. But Caesar was not a man to let fate decide. He knew that the element of surprise was still in his hands, and that Scipio's hesitation was an opportunity. When two more veteran legions arrived at Ruspina, Caesar saw the right moment to break the deadlock. With a reinforced army, supplies secured, and morale high, he organized a march toward his true strategic objective, Thapsus, a fortified coastal city of great logistical and military importance. There, he could wage the final battle and put an end to senatorial resistance once and for all. But Caesar did not march just like that. Every step was calculated. He knew he would be followed, that he would be observed, and so he spread disinformation, organized diversionary skirmishes, and left troops at strategic points to keep the enemy confused. The advance toward Thapsus was, in practice, a masterpiece of military maneuvering, designed by someone who understood war not only as combat, but as a game of perception, morale, and psychological pressure. The stage was being set. The players were in place. And Thapsus, silent, awaited the sound of the trumpets that would change the course of the Republic. In February 46 BC, Caesar arrived on the outskirts of Thapsus, a coastal city that was now the center of gravity of the war. He knew that there could be no mistakes here. His goal was simple: to surround the city, cut off its supplies, and force the Optimates to face him in open field, where their experience could make all the difference. To do this, he blocked the sea access with his fleet and began building fortifications around the land territory, creating a strategic trap. Metellus Scipio, for his part, did not intend to surrender Thapsus so easily. He positioned his troops on the eastern side of the city, trying to protect the workers who were setting up their camp and, at the same time, avoid being cornered. His army was large, around 90,000 men, including heavy infantry, cavalry, archers, light African units, Numidian troops, and most intimidating war elephants, live giants brought by Juba, to spread terror on the battlefield. The tension was almost palpable. For days, the armies faced each other in silence under the relentless African sun, with no one taking the first step. Caesar, who now had 60,000 soldiers, organized his army with a coolness that had made him one of the greatest generals in history. He divided his forces into 3 lines, mixing veterans with recruits to balance morale and experience. On the flanks, he positioned his cavalry and archers. And as a final touch of genius, he left his 5th Legion as a special reserve, trained specifically to face the elephants. And then the unexpected happened. A trumpeter from the 7th Legion, perhaps by mistake, perhaps on impulse, sounded the advance. Caesar's army moved automatically, and Caesar, realizing there was no turning back, ordered a mass attack. It was like thunder on the sand. The right flank, formed by archers and slingers, fired at the elephants, which quickly panicked. Enraged, disoriented, and wounded, the animals turned on their own troops, causing chaos among Scipio's soldiers. On the left flank, Caesar opened space for the 5th Legion to face the animals head-on. The legionaries attacked with precision, aiming for the eyes and joints, while sounding trumpets to further confuse the animals. Result: the elephants, terrified, trampled their own soldiers and destroyed the enemy front line. With the flanks destabilized, the rest of Scipio's army collapsed. Caesar wasted no time. He ordered his cavalry to advance like a blade cutting through soft flesh. The enemy camp was taken, the soldiers panicked, and resistance collapsed. The garrison at Thapsus still tried to counterattack, but was repelled by the legions that Caesar had left behind in the siege. Soon, the camp of Afranius, another enemy commander, was also invaded and forced to surrender. What began as an accidental advance ended in a crushing victory. Thapsus was more than a tactical victory. It was a massacre, a cry for Caesar's absolute power over the fate of Rome. And even with explicit orders to spare the prisoners, blood flowed. The victory at Thapsus was total, but what followed was not a celebration. It was carnage. It is estimated that some 10,000 enemy soldiers were killed, many of them while trying to surrender. Even with clear orders from Caesar to spare prisoners, the hatred built up in the legions exploded into fury. Soldiers killed with burning eyes, driven by months of persecution, shortages, ambushes, and the memory of their fallen comrades. Caesar, always a master at maintaining control of his troops, this time found himself unable to contain them. The Battle of Thapsus, although technically flawless, ended in a bloodbath that he had never intended. This episode marked a definitive turning point. The Optimates, after this catastrophic defeat, were at their wits' end. Their main leaders began to flee, but Rome, that divided, conflicted, republican Rome, was already a shadow of its former self. Juba and Petrio, cornered, took refuge in Numidia, where they made a symbolic and brutal decision. They fought to the death to avoid being taken prisoner. Petrio killed Juba, and then ordered a slave to kill him. A tragic and almost theatrical end for 2 men who had borne the weight of senatorial resistance on their shoulders. In Utica, Cato the Younger, the last great symbol of republican integrity, learned of the defeat and, with it, the ruin of the cause for which he had lived. Refusing to live under Caesar's rule, he committed suicide in a silent but eloquent gesture that would echo for centuries as the symbol of a Rome that refused to kneel. It is said that Caesar, upon learning of Cato's death, wept sincerely and said that he would rather have forgiven him than see him dead. Metellus Scipio, despite being defeated, tried to escape with a fleet towards the Iberian Peninsula, but was intercepted. With no way out, he took his own life after a naval defeat. Others, such as Afranius and Faustus Cornelius Sulla, were captured and executed by Caesar's allies. Only Titus Labienus, accompanied by Pompey's sons, managed to escape with his life, taking refuge in Spain, where he would begin to organize a new front of resistance. Meanwhile, Caesar marched back to Rome, received as a hero, but carrying the weight of a victory that cost more than enemy blood. He consolidated absolute power, but he knew that there was still one last battle ahead, Munda, where he would face the last ghosts of the Civil War. Thapsus was not just a military victory. It was the symbolic destruction of the old republic. The massacre, the suicides, the silence that followed, all of this set the scene for a new era. Rome was no longer governed by senators. It was Caesar's world now. If Thapsus marked the end of an era, the next chapter reveals how Caesar faced his last and most brutal battle. And if you've made it this far, it's because you feel, just like me, the weight of history pulsing through your veins. So don't let this connection slip away. Subscribe to the channel now to continue following this epic journey, where each video brings to light the behind-the-scenes dramas and decisions that shaped the greatest empire of antiquity. Leave a like if this story captivated you from beginning to end, and comment below. Would you have fought alongside Caesar or Cato? Your opinion is a living part of this historical reconstruction. Here, Rome did not fall. Here, Rome lives on in each new video. Until the next chapter.